Discourse plays a fundamental role in shaping power structures by invoking truths, fixing meanings, establishing practices, and determining morality. It is deeply intertwined with power. Understanding the term discourse is crucial in examining how these dynamics operate. While the term is often understood in a straightforward manner, referring simply to a stretch of text or spoken utterances that form a coherent narrative, cultural studies practitioners use the term in a more technical sense. Discourse in cultural studies is not just about forming sentences or paragraphs, but involves the regulation of language and practices. Discourse in cultural studies represents the regulated ways of speaking about subjects or phenomena, often governed by specific rules and norms. These regulated ways of speaking are not arbitrary but are structured in such a way that they shape and restrict how we understand objects, practices, and ideas. Through the repetition of these regulated ways of speaking, meanings solidify and become naturalized to the point where alternative ways of understanding a phenomenon may be excluded or rendered invisible. Over time, the meanings associated with these practices are reinforced, leading to the emergence of knowledge about the world. The term discursive practice refers to the production of knowledge through language and the practices that give meaning to material objects and social realities. As language is used repeatedly within a specific discursive framework, it constructs and reinforces particular ways of understanding, shaping both individual objects or societal structures. This process is not limited to the realm of theoretical discourse, but extends to all forms of social interaction, including religion, science, law, and economics. Each of these domains articulates its own version of reality, governed by distinct rules of discourse. Discourse also plays a critical role in shaping the concept of the subject. The way something is talked about, whether it's man in religious discourse, scientific discourse, or psychiatric discourse, dictates how the subject is constructed and understood. This power to name or define the subject is a form of power that is exercised through language. Discourses function not just to represent subjects but to create and control them by framing their existence within predefined categories. The subjects are both the effects and creations of discourse, shaped and controlled by the ways in which they are talked about and categorized. When discourse becomes established as knowledge, it exerts significant power. Knowledge, legitimized through discourse, controls and shapes the way we understand ourselves and the world around us. Discourse is a mechanism through which power operates, creating subjects and practices while simultaneously controlling them. In the context of cultural studies, the role of discourse is to question and destabilize these power structures by analyzing how meaning is produced and regulated. Through such analysis, cultural studies aims to reveal how discursive functions, while appearing stable, are always contingent and open to challenge. The relationship between discourse, knowledge, and power is not one dimensional. Discursive practices do not simply produce knowledge, they also establish regimes of truth where certain interpretations of reality become dominant and naturalized. These regimes seek to stabilize meanings and create a sense of truth that is accepted by society. However, this stability is always temporary because it is shaped by the discursive practices of the time. Just as Stuart Hall's circuit of culture shows the interconnections between representation, meaning, and power, discourses operates in a similar way. Discourse cannot be studied in isolation. It must be understood in relation to knowledge, power, and the practices that sustain them. Discourse is not just about language, but about the practices that shape knowledge and power. The study of discourse in cultural studies is inherently political, aiming to destabilize meanings and challenge the established order. As a result, understanding discourse requires not only an analysis of the specific terms and practices, within a given discourse, but also an awareness of how those terms circulate and shape our understanding of the world. In Barth's concept of the death of the author, the focus is on the singularity of the author rather than the literal absence of the author's voice or message. It does not mean that the author has no message or moral to convey, nor does it imply that the author's voice is irrelevant. The argument put forth by Foucault and other post structuralists is that discourse, the flow of language, already exists independently of the individual who is speaking. The author, while still a producer of the text, becomes secondary to the pre existing structures of language and discourse. The author's singularity is effectively diminished or dies in the sense that their voice becomes absorbed into the larger body of discourse. This does not negate the significance of what the author communicates, but it emphasizes that the text is shaped by an already existing system of language. A work of literature, Foucault suggests, is not merely the expression of an individual's unique personality or intention. Instead, it is bound within a framework of language, an anonymous flow that exists outside the control of any one person. The paradox here lies in the fact that while the author is identifiable, their work transcends their individuality. The work lives as part of a collective and anonymous linguistic structure. The power is not in the individual, but in the language and discourse itself, which shape how the text is constructed and understood. This idea challenges the traditional view of authorship, where the author is seen as the central figure who dictates the meaning of a work. Instead, the focus shifts to language, discourse, and the inherent structures that govern them. The discourse in which an author writes is not simply a personal expression. It is embedded in a larger framework of meanings and structures that precede and influence the individual. In this sense, the death of the author is less about denying the author's existence or relevance and more about recognizing that writing occurs within a pre established system of language and ideas. The idea of the death of the author thus requires a shift from viewing literature as a direct channel from the author to the reader to understand it as part of a broader social and linguistic system. David Howard's work on discourse further supports this idea. He observes that discourse analysis has gained significant prominence in various academic fields, not just in cultural studies but across anthropology, history, sociology, political science, and more. It is not just limited to written or spoken texts, but is a pervasive force that shapes social and cultural practices. It is a tool for understanding how language constructs power relations, social systems, and cultural norms. The growing interest in discourse analysis reflects a broader recognition that the ways in which we speak and write are not neutral but are influenced by and help shape the world around us. The concept of discourse has evolved beyond its traditional associations with language, stretching to encompass entire social systems. Today, discourse is understood as both a product and a determinant for social and political realities. In cultural studies, discourse is seen as more than just a set of utterances or written paragraphs. It is an integral part of how societies function and how individuals understand their roles within those systems. Discourse shapes not only how we communicate, but also how we think, perceive, and act in the world. This shift in understanding comes from the influence of the linguistic turn, which has led to new approaches in fields such as critical theory, post-structuralism, and hermeneutics. Discourse analysis, particularly in cultural studies, has become a power for critiquing and deconstructing the ways in which language constructs meaning, power, and identity. It allows scholars to examine the structures that govern communication and the ways in which these structures influence our perceptions of reality. The rise of discourse analysis has led to a more nuanced understanding of how social systems are constituted. Discourse is not just an abstract concept but a practical and powerful force that shapes human experience. It influences not only how we speak but also how we think and understand the world. Discourse has the power to shape cultures, define social roles, and establish political realities. It is not just a way of speaking, it is a way of being in the world, and it structures how we engage with others and with the world around us.